when it comes to actually adding a vehicle, like what's the most important thing like you should know when adding a vehicle to Turo, or have we already covered it, or is there something else that you want to share?
No, actually, I think there's two things that are like, I don't know if they're equally as important, but that you should definitely do before anything at all. And that is, number one is obviously like do the research, because if you're in a market where nobody's renting cars, then you might as well not, I mean, granted, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't cost you anything to list it. So you could say, well, I'll just list it and see what happens. So that's not as big of a deal, but more so in like researching your numbers. So like, how much do you live near an airport? Is it worth you driving to drop off the vehicle at an airport? Or if you need to get an Uber back, that's going to cost you $100 each way, and you can only charge, let's say, I believe it's 120. I believe there's a limit on that. Then is it worth it? So that's what I mean by like, just make sure that you look at all of the numbers, because it's going to depend. There's so many factors that the numbers are going to depend on. But then the other really important thing that a lot of hosts don't even, and I didn't even know about this in the beginning. I found out, thankfully, right when I went to list the car that I bought just for Turo, and that is insurance. So the insurance requirements. So there's some states in the US that this doesn't apply to, a few, like I think less than a handful. But for the most part, from the research that I've done, most people can't. Like if you just wanted to go out right now and just list your car, you could do that. But if your insurance company were to find out, they could drop you.
They're going to drop you.
Because they do not want you to do Turo. And it's very different from, so they consider Turo car sharing and then Uber's ride sharing. And so there's still a lot, if not most insurances that do not want Turo. If they find out, they'll drop you. Most guests, this is something that I actually did, and I just want to mention that like a lot of these things I have like videos that I've done on, very like detailed videos, and the insurance was one of them that I really wanted to do, because I feel like it's super important, because a lot of guests, they think, well, they don't find out, and if they find out, they'll drop me and it's not a big deal, I'll just stop doing Turo. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is actually that if, let's say, you get into an accident during the off rental period where your insurance is supposed to be covering, right. And let's say you're at fault and you total your car, and somehow they have ways to find these things out. Somehow your insurance company finds out that you're doing Turo, they can come back and say, hey, you know what, actually, we're not going to pay the claim. You are insured, and you're purposes. Yeah, because your policy is void, because we specifically stated in there that you cannot use it for, even though it's kind of silly, because you would think like when the car is rented, which is probably most of the time, if you're just using it for Turo, it's being covered by Turo's insurance plan or coverage plan. It's not really an insurance plan, but so you would think they wouldn't care, but they do. And so that's just a big consideration to take into account, that a lot of either Turo hosts don't know about, or they just are kind of like, well, like I said, they just think, well, I'll get dropped. Well, yeah, but you can be in a really bad situation if you totaled your car. Now you owe $40,000 to the bank. You have no car, and your insurance company says, nope, your policy was void. You don't actually have coverage because you're doing Turo. So I would say that's probably the number one thing to look into. And then, of course, your numbers to make sure that it's even worth, getting into.
So you got, she just gave you double tips, so y'all should be grateful. And we'll be sure to leave a link to the video that she was referencing in the description and the pinned comment, as well as her YouTube channel, which y'all should definitely check out. There's a lot of good content just about Turo in general. But I will say this about the insurance. Do you know how it works? Like if an accident was to happen, I am comparing it to Uber and Lyft, because a lot of people are probably in the same headspace that this is all in the same category. I don't think it should, but most people are going to assume it is. Uber and Lyft, they obviously do have commercial insurance, and they will cover an accident, but only if you file a claim with your insurance and they deny you. So the thing about that is, well, obviously they are going to deny you if you don't have rideshare insurance. They're going to drop you, and then Uber and Lyft would cover it, but they have a 2,500 deductible, which is, but they only cover you after you've already attempted to go through yours. Do you know if Turo works the same way, where like, hey, our insurance will kick in as the backup if yours fails, or would they just cover it in general? Do you happen to know?
Yeah. So, and this one is also something that's like very like there's a lot of little nuances that thankfully I've never had a claim, but I've read I've done a lot of research on it. But so there's a few things because Turo will charge insurance, will charge the guests for insurance. So there's the guest insurance. Sometimes they'll waive that and they'll just say just use their personal insurance. Although people need to be careful because sometimes guests insurance, like your personal insurance, won't cover you to rent a car on Turo. So that's a whole nother side too. But the overall is that Turo charges the guests for insurance, then they charge us for insurance as well. So we also pay, basically, again, it's not a real insurance policy, but it does the same thing. And you basically decide what your deductible is going to be. So they have different plans. So they have like a 60%, a 70%, and that's basically like what part of the revenue do you keep? That's how it's based. So you can keep for example, I have mine on the highest, which is the 90 plan. So I keep 90% of my revenue. So in essence, I'm paying 10% for my insurance policy, but I have a high deductible, 2,500, I believe it is. So the Turo plan will cover the claim if it's during the rental period. So the last time I read their terms of service, it was that when you are driving to deliver the car, it's already covering you. So then you drop off the car, it's covering the car during the rental period. And then once the car gets dropped back off by the guest, it ends there. And again, this is like the last time I checked it, it could have changed, but it ends there. So if anything happens during that time, it's covered under the Turo plan. But then even then, there's different ways to handle it. So for example, you are given the option to deal with the guests directly. So I've heard of hosts that like contact the guest directly because that way they can kind of get the host to cover everything. I'm sorry, the guest to cover everything, including the deductible that I would have had because I have a 25. Yeah, so that's why this is very, there's a lot of little, but I have heard of hosts that contact the guests directly and have even recovered, gotten the full whatever claim amount. Let's say it costs $800. They've been able to just get the full $800. Then you have hosts who you also have the option of just saying, no, just let Turo deal with it. Turo can contact them, but then you're going to have your deductible guaranteed, whatever that deductible is. So it's pretty much the same as, typical insurance. It's just, there's another few little layers of things to think about. And also I've heard of hosts that like have had their cars totaled, but have actually made money from it because they bought it at a great price. And now Turo paid them, $2,000-$3,000 more for their car than what they purchased it for. So they actually ended up making money on a total loss. So there's just a lot of, of course, assuming you bought at a good price.
So it's very circumstantial.
Yeah, there's a lot of little details and things that, would affect the outcome. Your plan, their plan, just lots of things to definitely I would recommend. And we can put also the links to to all of these Turo sites so that people can read up on their own. Because I do suggest that everybody should read the terms of service to just get familiarized with them and, just make sure with anything that you get into, you just want to make sure you can learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, obviously, because otherwise you'll just keep learning forever. But definitely should check that out and, check out all of these little, just overall.
Okay. And you mentioned it's called a car share. So does that mean if someone actually did want to get a policy out there that actually wouldn't mind them driving for Turo, would they get car share insurance? Or is that a thing? Do you know? Because I know for rideshare insurance is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and even with ride sharing, there's still some companies that don't want to allow it.
Right.
Yeah. So there, I know. So first, I know there's a few states that have now come out with a law that says you can't drop the insured just because they're car sharing. So those people should be good.
Okay.
They may want to look into that. I believe California, and don't quote me, but I just know there's a few states. For those that don't have that, there are a few insurance companies. So I think Liberty Mutual is one that I contacted, and they would offer it, but it was a ridiculous cost. Now they did tell me that I should reach out again to like it's another specific department that they have that they suggested just reach out to them because maybe they'll be able to work with you on the cost. But basically, the cost was like almost the cost of my car payment, so it was like ridiculous. So that was just out of the question. But there are a few options if your car is just being used for Turo, if you're not also using it for personal reasons. So there's 3 insurances, and again, I have this, I have that's included in that in that video. There's ABI, Lula, and GMI, I believe it's what it's called, and they're basically like these commercial. Well, these are like agencies that work with insurance companies, and what they do is they give you a commercial policy that's going to cover your car for the time that it's not rented. But you can't use it for personal use. So it's basically just covering your car to take it to get, car washed, to take it to get maintenance, for business purposes. Now, how much can you, how much wiggle room is in there? Like they do give you an allowance. So they give you like 300, they vary, but it's like 200 to 300 miles per month to use for that purpose. So there are options. But assuming that you're not using the car for personal reasons. But again, even then, if you're barely using the car, if you just use it once or twice for personal reasons, maybe that's something that they'll even be willing to kind of work with you. And that part I still haven't contacted anyone about. But yeah.
Okay. So, because the thing about the insurance world, things change so slowly. Even though I think the world is just slow in general, it's kind of annoying because like it took forever for companies to start coming out with policies for rideshare. Like for the longest time, it was literally like, hey, you're just playing Russian roulette, and it's not even an option to find a rideshare policy. In fact, it was so extreme that let's say if you started quoting, like just getting quotes for a rideshare policy, you could be listed in the insurance base just from getting a quote as a rideshare driver, and that means that potentially your insurance could find out months later and drop you, which is just kind of crazy. But things have changed nowadays. There's actually a lot of companies that are offering rideshare policies now, and it looks like the same thing is steadily happening with the Turo rental world. Well, I'll say the car rental world because Turo is just one platform, but obviously there's Turo, there's Hire Car, there's probably platforms that I don't even know about that are out there. So as things evolve, it's just kind of like make sure you keep doing your research, right?
Yeah, definitely. I keep, every once in a while, I'll just do another Google search on insurance just to see if they've solved, that issue. I think it'll probably happen just because it's kind of silly. Like if you think about it, there's like you said, just like it happened with Uber.
Right.
But it's like if your car is really rented most of the time on Turo and it's being covered by Turo, why wouldn't you want to also take in some, charge some money for a car that's barely being touched, or the liability that you have is so minimal. So I think eventually they'll come around and start realizing that they gotta, Turo is becoming a lot bigger from like all the videos and things I've read. They're actually going to be going public. I know that I think someone mentioned recently that Hire Car, I think, that went out of business. I'm not sure, but they're definitely the largest one. So I would think that eventually insurance companies will realize that they gotta like catch up.
Right. You made me curious. I actually Googled Hire Car, and they still pop up. So I guess they're still in business. But yeah, maybe
Yeah, there
they're
may be something going on with them.
yeah.
Somebody mentioned that I think in a video recently.
At the end of the day, like these policies, they're basically it's like a tier list, and like the most expensive thing you can get if you're using something for commercial purposes is commercial insurance, and that'll run you like $3,000 to $6,000 per year. But it's like to get that wouldn't make sense because you're not using it for the same thing. Like the way I want to put it is, I like that's why I like the fact that rideshare insurance became a thing because it's something in between like normal insurance and commercial insurance, where it's not going to be expensive as commercial insurance, but obviously you might be a little more than regular insurance. And I see the same thing developing in this market. So yeah. But
Yeah,
speaking
I
of
just add to
car,
that, like, if before you move on to something else, I just want to mention that there are a lot of hosts that also do like private rentals. So they have like their cars under an LLC, which I'm actually looking into to do possibly, maybe not for these two because I wanted to get these two fairly quickly, but they do have their cars under an LLC, and then they have commercial policy, and then even like umbrella coverage, just because of the number of cars that they have, um, and then that way they're also able to do private rentals as well as the Turo. So yeah, that
except for
definitely is an option.
No Turo service fee though. So that'd be because I'm pretty Turo's charging something for you to be able to use their platform, right?
Yeah, it's basically the plan that you pick.
Right.
So the cheapest would be the 10%, where they take 10% of your revenue.
Yeah. So basically,
The
revenue.
bad, yeah, the thing with, and there's also a lot of videos out there about like private, versus Turo. The thing with that is that Turo is handling everything for you. They're vetting, they have the website, they have the market, the guests looking for, for cars. They vet, they do the vetting for you. They charge the money for you. They handle the claim. They do all that, and that's something that you would be doing on your own if you were going into like private rentals. So,
Right.
is it worth the 10% fee? I kind of think so. Unless you're at a point where depending on like at what level you're at.
Okay. Well, I will say this: if someone was going to go direct, would you give them this advice too? Obviously, you need to handle all that, but Turo doing the background check and checking for things on their record, that's pretty useful. Like, let's say if someone was to rent on Turo and it was a good experience, then they come back in town maybe a few months later, they want to rent through you again. You're like, but you have commercial insurance. Like, hey, we could just do this direct. Turo still vetted that person, so they're good. But this time let's just do it without the 10%, and maybe I can give you somewhat of a discount too. That's different than like, hey, I'm just taking people off Craigslist or something, and I haven't done the background check, and they may have DUIs on their record, and so like you could also use Turo as a kind of a lead generator if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, I just don't know how much. I mean, as it is, I think they even have like a thing against like doing. I know they have a thing that you can't have your car like on another platform in their terms of service, of course.
They all do.
But they
I find
probably
that stuff
also
funny.
have, yeah, yeah. So it's kind of one of those, like, yeah, you could probably do that. But you know,
Right. Yeah, I know what you
we
mean.
won't say it on here.
Hey, you didn't hear from us. All these
No.
platforms have that in their terms of service. We'll just leave it at that. Sup, everyone. Y'all just watched a clip from one of the episodes of the Side Hustler Society podcast. If you want to check out the full episode, you can click on the link in the description right now or click on the video that's showing in the end screen. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new and hit that bell notification if you want to be notified when another episode drops. And a thumbs up on this video is very much appreciated. I'll catch you in the next one.